do we come from? What is the true story of humanity's history? It's very different from what we've been taught in school. There is much more to learn than what the official version of reality allows us to know, as we've discovered through the many wonderful people that we've been blessed to meet and gain knowledge and insight from over the course of the years through the research that we've done. To everybody who has been a Dragonology fan and who has written in and who's bought the book and who's just been cheering on the series and taken such an interest in it, it's really been so inspiring to be able to deliver this information to you all. And for those who are interested in purchasing Dragonology Book 1 Spellbreaker, please go to my website, dragonology.info, and you're welcome to buy an ebook version of the book there. And remind you just how spectacular this journey of discovery has been.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you again on Conscious Consumer Network Live. This, of course, is a live broadcast of our scheduled program, Dragonology. And this is, of course, Season 4, Episode 1. And it's going to be a cracking season. So for those of you who have tuned in, thank you for doing so. Sit back and enjoy this episode of Dragonology. It's been an interesting few months as we've been journeying towards creating the next series and getting all our bits and pieces together. And for those, of course, who don't really know a lot about Dragonology, please do go back and watch Dragonology Seasons 1, 2, and 3. It'll help you get up to speed with where we are at the moment. For those who also don't know who I am, I'm the researcher, author, and of course, co-founder of this network, commonly known as Melvie, Melanie Vermeer on Facebook. And before I get started, I want to thank you up front for your time and attention, for taking the time today to learn a little bit more about the world we live in and to decipher the deception for yourself. If you're here watching this now, it means that you too know exactly what is going on in the world, or maybe you don't, but you want to know a little bit more and perhaps how to make it a better place. And for that, I can only be grateful for your attention, and I hope that I can help impart a little bit of wisdom as we take this journey into Dragonology Season 4. Okay, to start off with, for those people who perhaps don't know really what Dragonology is, as the name suggests, Dragonology is a study of dragons in our past and present culture. The occurrence of dragons in many myths and legends of the past and in many different regions and rituals gives us the indication that these creatures were absolutely everywhere and thus most likely has some bearing in reality. Dragonology is the study of anthropology via the mode and application of decoding symbolic expression, rather than through the traditional context of standardized textbook doctrine presented by educational institutions of the dominant culture. This body of work proves that dragons are real. They do exist and have always existed. They take on many different names in different cultures and mythologies across the world, but through a study of ancient history, architecture, art, symbolism, language, etymology, and philology, a pattern develops which links all these creatures, referenced under different names in different contexts, to being the same creature commonly known as the dragon. The word dragon is meant as a replacement for the word mythology, as it is indeed a far more accurate expression of this particular area of study pertaining to cultural anthropology, past societies, and their respective traditions. So why do we study Dragonology? Well, basically, the human species is a slave species that serves the dragon gods, overlords or masters or whatever you want to call them, as the dragons have hijacked and manipulated our thought process, leaving us trapped and paralyzed in a construct that's not of our making. Dragons hold human attention in an ontological construct by defining the parameters of our reality through the creation and control of our words and language. In order to break free from the draconian construct, we must first learn to understand the nature of that construct by learning to identify dragon symbolism, which is interwoven into the very fabric of our reality through symbols, words, language, architecture, art, culture, and ritual. Today we're going to deal with some themes that perhaps start with the origins of who we are. It's the basics. Who we are, where do we come from? These are important questions if we are to know what is really going on and what is being done to us. Well, let's start with the biblical context. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It says so in Genesis 1, chapter 1, the very first book of the Bible, the very first chapter and the very first verse states, in the beginning, it was God who created the heavens and the earth. And creation is an interesting concept and quite controversial, but we'll get into that a little bit more because in actual fact, the creational aspect or creational mythologies turn up in almost all cultures across the world. And dragons are credited with being the creators of humanity. Serpent gods or dragons turn up in many creation myths. But many people believe in the concept of evolution. And well, to be honest with you, I used to be an evolutionist until I started looking a little bit more into mythology. Texts from ancient mythology, including the Bible, have long since promoted the idea that human beings were created by a superior being or beings of an immense intelligence and power. Scientists and academics relegated these ideas to the realms of semi-dismissive mythology. But since the 19th century, the scientific community has considered humanity's origins to be rooted in the concept of Darwinistic evolution, which propagates the belief that all life on Earth, including human beings, have descended over time from common ancestors. The theory of human evolution postulates that human beings, or Homo sapien, are descended from primates such as apes and gorillas. What many do not know is that Charles Darwin's theories are not based on factual research, rather in a need to create a social climate known as social Darwinism to facilitate selective breeding programs in eugenics programs. Darwin's theories put forward in his work on the origin of species were used to justify immoral and discriminatory selective breeding programs with policies and practices which advocated for higher rates of sexual reproduction amongst people with desired traits, or reduced rates of sexual reproduction, including forced sterilization of people with less desired traits. In the decades following World War II, with the institution of human rights, many countries gradually began to abandon the eugenics policies. However, gene selection rather than people selection has recently been made possible through advances in genome editing, leading to new eugenics. When it comes to Darwin's theories on evolution, it is clear that the intentions behind them were not to explain the origins of human beings, but to determine what genetic traits of human beings should be for the future. Humans are genetically modified organisms. This is what I've come to learn through all of my research. The theories of Darwinistic evolution have been disproven by several credible researchers, and recent discoveries, including and indicating that there is much genetic manipulation in the human genome. And this has reignited the idea that humanity was in fact created through a process of genetic manipulation, and that there is some truth to the allegory of mythology and the writings of the biblical book of Genesis. One need only look at how very different we are from all other creatures on earth to ascertain this concept. A basic example of just how different humanity is illustrated in the fact that no other creature on earth has anything such as the concept as a wardrobe or the need for clothing. All life, which evolved naturally on earth, has had the time to also evolve the necessary bodily protections to survive the elements of their environment. Due to the fact that humanity did not evolve naturally on Earth, we have to seek protection from the elements by artificial means. This has resulted in the need for clothing, housing, heating, and cooling mechanisms, which are all external to us and are artificially derived as opposed to being naturally evolved mechanisms of survival. Humanity is indeed a hybrid species, and this has been proven by many people just through a few basic observations. Robert Sapir, who is one of my favorite authors on the subject, has written a book called The Species with Amnesia, Our Forgotten History. And he clearly states, if mankind evolved from the same African ancestor, then everyone's blood would be compatible. But it's not. Rhesus negative blood types appear suddenly around 35,000 years ago in Cro-Magnon. Where did the Rhesus negatives come from? Why does the body of a Rhesus negative mother carry the Rhesus positive child and try to reject her offspring? Humanity isn't one race, but a hybrid species. In fact, we are different species. There are definite subspecies of human being, and not all of them are compatible with each other when they breed. Evidence for this, that we are in fact a hybrid species, is evident in the fact that we have had some sort of genetic manipulation done to us. And in fact, if you look at our DNA, 95% of our DNA is considered to be junk DNA or inactive DNA because it's DNA which seems to have absolutely no function. We have more genetic defects and abnormalities than any other species. And this is what happens when you start tinkering with the genetic structure of something. You have genetic defects. Rhesus negative blood types. This is a very interesting thing because all animals on Earth have the presence of the Rhesus protein except for certain human bloodlines. It seems that human beings, only a few of them, a very small percentage, I think it's less than 10 or 15% of the population of planet Earth are Rhesus negative. The etymological evidence of creation by dragons is evident in the words. We just have to look at the words to understand where it is we came from. Proof of a technologically superior race of dragons having genetically engineered the human species is evident in the etymology. For example, we talk about our origins or our beginnings. We reference the book of the beginnings as Genesis. It says, Introduction to Genesis, the book of the beginnings. Okay, that's what Genesis is. What is the significance of Genesis? The word Genesis literally means beginning, origin, or birth. Okay, so these three words are inextricably linked to each other, and they carry a root word, jin. Okay, J-I-N, J-I-N. Now the I transliterates out of the E in Genesis. And if you actually have a look at where this root word turns up, it also turns up in the word gene, genealogy, and genetic, proving that we were a genetically modified species. We were created. Genesis talks about our creation as a genetically modified species. And who genetically modified us? Well, that's evident in the etymology too. If you have a look at where the gen root word in Dragonology comes from, it all stems from what is known as the jinn. Now, the jinn is an Arabic or Islamic classification for an angel or dragon. And there's various ways in which this can be spelt. But the jinn actually turned into or evolved over time into what became known as the genie. And we'll deal a little bit more with that. This is some Arabic style depictions of what the jinn looked like, how it's been interpreted. And they're at least 100 years old. You can see wings, looking a bit demon-like. But over here again, you'll notice the wings. This is a common theme that keeps coming up. It's like this humanoid type beings, maybe a little bit hybrid looking or a little bit fearsome looking, perhaps beings which wouldn't normally have wings that have wings. Wings are a symbol of the dragon bloodline. And of course, so is the serpent. You always find the serpents turning up. Now, the jinn is a very interesting creature or reference in our study of Dragonology. And I bring it up again and again because it's a very good point to go back to. A lot of things stem off from the jinn, and of course we'll be dealing with the DJ aspect as well. But first, let's talk about the genie. Many people may remember the Disney film Aladdin, and it was one of my favorites when I was a kid. In fact, the archetype of the genie is depicted with supernatural abilities, which may be remembered from the film, such as shape-shifting, the ability to appear and disappear, and of course, this interesting-looking serpent vapor-like trail that they kind of come out of a magic lamp with. And of course, the word vapor is etymologically cognizant with the word viper. And of course, they have the ability, supposedly, to grant wishes, or so it is in the film. They granted 3 wishes. Now, granting wishes is akin to the concept of the Faustian pact or the deal with the devil. Okay, many people who have become rich and famous are in fact in a Faustian pact with the dragons who have manipulated them into those positions. The genie is commonly artistically represented and depicted as coming from a lamp, which is a further allegory to other themes associated with dragonology, such as illumination, okay? And the word Illuminati, of course, stemming from this. Enlightenment. Literature, of course, the dragons are said to give us our language and the skills of reading and writing. And, of course, Lucifer known as the light bearer. And sun gods are a dragon allegory. And the word deity, cognizant with the word day, of course, when the sun is shining, it is daytime. So this is obviously, again, an extended theme of the lamp. What does a lamp do? A lamp gives light. Here's some other artistic representations of the genie. Again, notice the vapor-like trail, almost serpent-like in its long and undulating form, coming out of the lamp. And of course, in this depiction of the genie, again, we see the wings because, of course, wings are a symbol of the dragon bloodline. Now, we spoke about the DJ as in the jinn, okay? The DJ is Egyptian hieroglyphics depicted as a cobra at rest. When you see this symbol in Egyptian hieroglyphics, phonetically, it is indicative of the consonant sound in the English language, j, which is commonly written as a DJ, and when combined, has evolved into the G sound. In fact, if you have a look at the D and the J together, they actually make up the G. It's interesting to notice that the names of Egyptian gods often contain the key combination indicating dragon gods being the DJ. For example, the god Thoth, who, as we already mentioned, the dragons gave us the ability to, gave us our alphabets, gave us writing, record keeping, reading, scribes, arts, sciences, intelligence, magic, wisdom, and thought. And the DJ turns up in the names of some interesting dragon creatures. It's absolutely a symbol of the dragon bloodline because serpents are a symbol of the dragon. And you'll see here the cobra at rest, Jehuti. Okay, Jehuti is also known as Thoth, the supposed founder of what became ancient Egypt, and supposedly a surviving priest from the sunken continent of Atlantis. Now, in ancient Egypt, you'll find many serpent deities depicted in their amazing artworks, in their tombs and in various other places. Here we go. Here's, as we say, a serpent with wings, because serpents and wings, obviously, indicative of the dragons, and a sun disk. Now, the sun, as we've already mentioned, is a serpent symbol. And here you see this, the temple of Wadjet with the serpents on them. The serpents in ancient Egypt were known as Uraei or Uraeus, and they turn up absolutely everywhere. Of course, the DJ turns up in the name of Wadjet, the serpent goddess. Now let's look at how the D and J evolved into the G and what that means, because as we've already discussed, the J sound, okay, the DJ symbol is phonetically identical to the hard G. So the J, not the G, the J. It's the hard G, which is symbolic of the dragon. The letter G is the 7th letter of the alphabet and has a numerical significance, being referenced as 7 days of the week, 7 chakras, 7 deadly sins, 7 virtues, and there's many other examples of number 7. But that is what position the G takes up in the alphabet. And what's interesting to notice is that the G also turns up in the Freemason symbol. Of course, this is the square and compass, one of the most commonly known symbols of the Freemasons. Most people don't actually know what the G means, but this is what it's referencing. The G is a very, very important letter in Dragonology. And we'll go on to have a look at where the letter G actually turns up. For example, of course, we talk about in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we've spoken about the beginnings and then God. All right. So the G, of course, is the first letter of God. So on those bases, of course, it's important. Now, when we talk about God and the devil, they actually are, it's funny because the words God and good are very similar, very much etymologically cognizant with each other. And the word devil is very much etymologically cognizant with the word evil. In fact, you've got evil in the word devil. Other words that are interesting to note, of course, is gold. And that will become obviously relevant as we go through this, why gold is significant. Goat, referencing, for example, the goat god Pan. The jinn, and of course, you've spoken about the jinn and the genies, and of course, the root word jinn turning up in origin, gen, gene, genesis, and of course, gone. Now we transliterate out the vowel sounds because all 5 of the vowel sounds transliterates for each other, the I, the E, and the O. Right, so the word gone turns up in the word dragon. And of course, gone also turns up in gorgon. If you don't know what a gorgon is, Google it and you can see for yourself. These are deities which commonly had serpents for hair. Think of Medusa. She was a gorgon with hair that was made of serpents. And of course, serpent symbolism is a symbol of the dragon. And then there are various other words which are referencing the dragons that have the double G in it. When you see the double G, it is a reference to the dragons. And they turn up in the word Ijiji, which is an ancient word for the dragon. Grigori, another ancient word for the dragon. Gargoyles, dragon stone statues which protect churches. Gargantuan, and of course that means giant, but there's an offshoot from this called Gargantes, who is actually a Greek god from ancient mythology that had serpents for legs. Of course, the names Gregory and Greg also come from this root, and it's interesting to note that there were many popes named Gregory. And of course, the name George, as in George, Saint George, who was commonly known as slaying the dragon. There are many artistic representations of Saint George slaying the dragon. And of course, the words giggle, which of course is indicative of things like laughter. And if you have a look at the word laughter and you put the letter S on it, what do you get? Slaughter, almost like the complete opposite in theme. It's amazing when you put the serpent letter on, it completely changes the meaning. And of course, once again, grin and grim, etymologically cognizant with each other, but completely different meanings. If you're grinning, supposedly you're happy, but if you grim, supposedly you're not. And this is quite interesting to notice, is that they will often place complete diametric opposites as very similar things so as to mask deeper allegories. And this also links to the theme of oral. When you giggle with your mouth. And when you gargle with your mouth. And oral is an interesting word because it has a dragon root word O-R as well as a dragon root word A-L. Of course, speak and spell are 2 very common words that come up in Dragonology. The dragon supposedly gave us our language. And of course, S-P-E is a dragon root word, as is everything, all the words that come with the S-P-E, S-P-I, S-P-A, S-P-O. Those are dragon root words. And of course, gregarious and egregious, meaning outstandingly bad or shocking. You'll notice there's a lot of negative themes associated with dragon words because, let's face it, they haven't really been a very positive influence on humanity. So God, or the dragons, when we talk about God, we're always referencing the dragon, gods, deities, angels, demons, we are always referencing the dragons. So God created man in his own image, meaning that the dragons gave us some of their DNA, okay? And this is very evident in the fact that we actually have a reptilian part of our brain. It's actually called the reptilian brain. They gave us some of our DNA. They took Neanderthal man, tinkered with Neanderthal man's genetics, shut down 95% of it, and installed a reptilian brain into us through the genetics. And that's the part of our brain that's very primitive and quite, cold. And that's where we go to when we're in fear and anger. It's a totally different part of the brain that is activated called the reptilian brain. And God, the dragons, created man like this. They created them in his own image, meaning they gave us some of their DNA. But of course, they couldn't give us too much, otherwise we'd be as strong as them. So they shut down a whole bunch of it, making 95% of it inactive, but making us intelligent enough to be able to read and write, follow instructions, and mine their gold and mines and be their slaves in factories, but not so intelligent that we actually figure out what the hell it is they're doing to us, or some of us have. So he has created the way we are, these dragons. And of course, this turns up again in Genesis. As we've already mentioned, Genesis having the root word gen. So the dragons created man. Homo sapien was created as a slave species of the gods or dragons. In fact, in the Sumerian tablets, the story is told of how the Anunnaki came to Earth and created a hominid species, which is the modern day Homo sapien, to be slaves and to mine gold. And the theme of gold comes up again and again and again. Often you'll see, for example, in Buddhist traditions where they will go and deliver gold offerings or gold leaf offerings to statues of Buddha. And you see these Buddha statues with many, many layers of gold that's been piled onto them by people bringing gold offerings. Because gold, you cannot separate, no matter how far back in humanity's history, you cannot separate humanity from their obsession with gold, from the practice of slavery, and from the worship of dragons or serpent deities. So as we said, we have been created, genetically created. The word creation has an interesting allegory because there's a root word in it, which, there's many ways we can get into this, and many ways we can take this theme. But for now, I want to look at the word EAT, okay, commonly referenced as the verb eat, as in, you eat your food. The dragon symbol, recognized as the Ouroboros, commonly depicts a dragon or a serpent in the process of eating its tail, consuming its tail, which is a bit odd. I mean, the consumption of oneself is not something we normally do. So this is quite an interesting thing. It was eating itself. Eventually it destroys itself. But what's interesting to notice is the Ouroboros is actually also used as a symbol of eternity, death, and rebirth. Here's some other depictions of the Ouroboros. Of course, it turns up in many cultural depictions across the world, cultures that seem perhaps to be in different times and different places, have never had contacts, and yet you see the symbol of the serpent consuming its tail in a round circle like this. This is an Egyptian depiction, and this is a depiction from mysticism. Here you see they've used two serpents eating each other's tail. Notice the wings on this one, and of course the crown. Now the Ouroboros, of course, forms a circle. Circles and cycles are common recurring symbolic themes in allegory of dragon studies. Of course, we've already mentioned cycles of birth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, and it is an ongoing cycle, and that's one of the allegories of the Ouroboros. But for now, we want to deal with the more prosaic theme of what we see in the Ouroboros, which is the circular shape. The word circle is etymologically cognizant with the word serpent, having the ser root, S-E-R. Now, the words curse and church also come from the same root of word groupings. And it's interesting to know where this circle of the dragon or the Ouroboros eating its tail turns up. For example, that known as the world serpent. In Norse mythology, there were supposedly 9 worlds which flanked the cosmological tree Yggdrasil, which was encircled by the world serpent called Jormungandr. Here's another depiction of this, the world serpent encircling this entire, here, as well. We've got this, see the serpent around the world tree. And it's not just in sort of the round the world tree kind of allegories. You'll find that there's on the perimeters, on the edge, you'll find that dragons are depicted as being at the edge of the earth. In fact, antique illustrations from wood cuttings and sketches often show the flat earth, okay, earth as being flat, but still include illustrations of the dragon at the edge of the flat earth, as is the case here. And, you know, it's not just Norse mythology. You'll find the same symbolism turning up in mythologies across the world. In Hindu mythology, the world serpent is often seen encircling the world tortoise, which supposedly carries the flat earth on its back. Here's some other illustrations of the world tortoise carrying the earth. And, of course, there's obviously a central point, which is, you know, in Norse mythology would be the tree, Yggdrasil. And, of course, it's around the perimeter that we see these dragons. It's kind of circular. If we kind of have a look here, you'll notice that it's around the perimeter of the 9 worlds. Again here, around the perimeter of the 9 worlds that flank the tree of life. So it's around the perimeter that you see these dragons. And again, let's look at another culture. This is the Japanese culture. This antique Japanese map from 1855 depicts a dragon around the perimeter, symbolically indicative of complete control. The word perimeter contains the dragon root word peri. And of course, here are the various other words that come from the same root. Persia, Peru, person, pure, purple, Paris, Paraguay, paragraph, parable, parler, being a French word to speak. Pearl, the fruit known as a pair of gloves. To peer, to look or see. A pier, something you walk out on over the water. And pior, which is the suffix to the word Baal Peor. Okay, Baal Peor is another word for an ancient god or deity, often known as Moloch. And we'll deal with Moloch a bit later. The word peri is interesting because it turns up in a lot of interesting places. For example, perimeter. In Persian mythology, the peri are winged fairy-like spirits ranking between angels and evil spirits, which visit the realms of the mortals. Early sources describe the peri as agents of evil who have been denied paradise until they have done penance. And of course, this is not me making it up. This comes right out of Wikipedia. This is an 1878 picture of the peri. Now, the peri, Gustav Moreau's depiction of the peri is interesting because it shows an actual dragon in this depiction, which I thought was really cool because it shows you what the peri really are. And of course, Gustav Moreau was a famous major figure in French symbolist painting. And he painted many themes focused on biblical and mythological scenes, particularly dealing with symbolic allegory. And this is a 16th century Ottoman Turkish drawing of a peri. Again, as I've already mentioned, notice the wings. Whenever you see wings on a humanoid being, which I mean us as humans, we don't have wings, it's always indicative of that being a dragon. I just wanted to mention before we get on to the next is that the word peri is etymologically cognizant with the words fairy and fairy. All right, both of them sound the same, but both of them have 2 totally different meanings. Of course, the word fairy, we think about Tinkerbell, the cute little fairy, and the word ferry. For example, you catch a boat from Dover to Calais. You catch the ferry from Dover to Calais, and it's spelt this way. The word peril is interesting as well because the dragon root word peri is found in the word peril, and the word peril is a synonym for danger. In fact, in Portuguese, the word perigo means danger. And as I live in the Algarve, I've seen the sign, actually noticed the sign on the beach over the summer when I was tanning near the cliffs. And it's easy to see that the word peri turns up in perigo, all right, perigo, which is clearly danger, all right? The word peril being synonym for danger. And what's interesting to notice is that the word danger contains the dragon root word A-N-G-E, okay? Or if you look, take a little further, it contains the word anger, all right? And of course, the A-N-G-E is turns up in the word angel. Now, angel is interesting because actually angel means dragon. In fact, the word anger is synonymous with the word fury. You know, I'm angry, I'm furious. You know, these two words very much are the same sort of meaning. Again, notice how negatively polarized these words are that are associated with the dragons. And what's interesting is that in Greek mythology, the Furies were female chthonic deities of vengeance. Again, notice the wings and the serpents. The same symbolic allegory turns up again and again when you start to deconstruct and decompose and decipher all the etymology. Notice the symbolism in the words as well as the visually artistically represented symbolism. And here's some other representations of the Fury. Of course, this one is from an ancient Greek pottery that has been painted on. You'll notice the serpents around the hands and the head, like the Gorgon Medusa we've already mentioned. And again, notice the wings. Okay, yes, serpents twisted around the hands, serpents everywhere. Here we go again with the serpents in their hands. As you mentioned, the cute little fairy that we think of in Disney depictions such as Tinkerbell, really you know, also again has these wings, humanoid being with wings, indicative of the dragon. The word fury and fairy, of course, being etymologically cognizant with each other, and other expressions for a fairy include the fae, fee, of course, fae spelled F-A-E, fairy, F-A-E-R-Y. They're known as fair folk, pixies, elves, sprites, nymphs, or sirens. The word fairy is also etymologically cognizant with the word pharaoh. And other words from this root group, of course, include paradise, paragraph, parable, and fanes. Pharaoh and fanes are etymologically cognizant with each other. And that's interesting because here we get onto the royalty theme. The pharaohs were the rulers or royalty of ancient Egypt. And for those of you who maybe follow some of the sort of more urban legends that are going around, there's lots of stories about the Queen of England being a shape-shifting reptile or dragon. Phanes was the protagonist deity from Greek mythology, supposedly the first of the gods. Protagonist is the first of the gods, okay? And is often interchanged with the god Mithra. From the word phanes, we get phantom, fan, fantasy, pan, and pain. Again, notice the negative association. And all depictions of Pan and phanes normally show them with cloven hooves. And of course, phanes here is depicted with wings. Okay, again, a humanoid being with wings. And notice he is wrapped in a serpent. There's the serpent's head coming up behind him and wrapping all the way around his body. The royalty theme is, again, indicative when you start looking at the various etymological connections. For example, the word basilisk. Basilisk is a type of dragon. It's a word that's used for a dragon and said to be the king of serpents. Again, serpent theme coming up. Basilisk is etymologically cognizant with the word basileus, which is a word referencing a king or an emperor. Now, the basilisk is the heraldic animal of Basel. Basilisk and Basel being etymologically cognizant with each other. And Basel being based in Switzerland. Of course, if anybody knows, Switzerland is where all the people who control the world hide their money. And then we look at rage. Okay, the words anger and fury are synonymous with each other, as is the word rage. You know, I'm angry, I'm furious, I'm raging inside. You know, rage. It's anger, fury, rage. Again, very negative dragon root words. But what's interesting to notice is the word rage, of course, contains the dragon root word R-A-G, which comes from dragon. It's actually in the word dragon. So anger, fury, and rage are all rooted in dragon etymology. Again, this very negative association. The word rage, when you swap out the G for the J, you get Raj, okay, or Raja. Here we go again with the royalty theme. Much like Pharaoh and Basileus, the Raja or Maharaja is an Indian expression for a ruler or king. The word Raja is etymologically cognizant with rage and dragon. Other words from this root word group include reign. What does a king do? It reigns. When we talk about a Reich, we talk about the Third Reich, which was the ruling Reich of Germany during the Nazi era. Rex is a Latin word for king. Regis is the Latin word for of the king, which is interesting because the word regis turns up in the word register. Okay. Now, the word register, basically, if you take it as a noun, it means an official list or record of names or items. Or as the verb, it means to detect or show something automatically. And when we register anything, be it our infant that we have, our child that we bear, our house that we buy, our car that we drive in, what we are in fact doing is making that child or that thing, that item, we are making it of the king, because that's what regis means. Regis, as we say here, means of the king. So what we're doing is, in effect, we are giving ownership of these things over to the rulers, okay? So when we register anything, okay, we are making that personal item of the king or belong to the king, ruler, or government. And he, she, it is no longer our belonging, okay? It belongs to the rulers, the kings, the government, the dragons. In the Garden of Eden, of course, we're dealing with, of course, the beginnings and Genesis. So we're going to start looking at the Garden of Eden. There are some interesting allegories which turn up. We, of course, already have dealt with the tree of life, Yggdrasil, which turns up in Norse mythology, and it turns up in a number of different mythologies across the world. And in the biblical accounts of Genesis, the Garden of Eden mentions two different types of trees, right? The tree of life, which turns up, as I say, in Norse mythology, and of course the tree of knowledge of good and evil. As we already spoken about, good and evil could mean God and the devil. So the knowledge of the dragons, okay, because gods and devils are dragons. So good being God, evil being devil. The tree of knowledge of the gods and the devils, where you are picking the forbidden fruit if you eat the fruit from this tree. And of course, the forbidden fruit being the knowledge, the dragon knowledge, quite literally the dragonology. And the two trees are interesting because this symbolic allegory turns up in some very interesting places. This is a photograph that I took of an artwork inside a Roman Catholic church in Leiden in Holland. It's available on my Facebook in one of my albums. And what's interesting to notice is that there are two trees here with what looks to be like a Virgin Mary figure holding a lily. You know, slightly Virgin Mary is often depicted with a lily. You can see the halo around the head depicting someone holy. Oh, but what's this? It's definitely an interesting looking creature here. It looks to be a dragon with his one tail wrapped around the tree, okay? The tree of knowledge of the gods and the devils, being the knowledge of the dragon. So it's interesting. Where was Eden? What was it? Was it an allegorical thing? Was it symbolic, or was it an actual place? According to the ancient Sumerian tablets, the word Eden was derived from the Sumerian word Eden, which has an I instead of an E. And of course, Eden means a flat plain. So Eden was supposedly a flat plain. Now remember that becomes significant later on when we get to look at where Eden was. And of course, the Garden of Eden is often referenced as paradise. And of course, para is a key dragon root word. Paradise is rooted in the Greek word paradosis, okay? Paradosis. This is where the word paradise actually comes from. And this is a beautiful painting by Hieronymus Bosch, Garden of Earthly Delights, and depicts Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, paradosis is interesting because according to Professor Walter Burkett, paradosis can be used in a narrower sense, referring to instruction, and in a larger sense, instruction plus ritual. Paradosis in the Bacchic rites describes the transmission of sacred knowledge from one generation of sacred persons to the next, originating from the snake and its enclosure in the temple grove. Okay, so already we talk about the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of the gods and the devils, the knowledge of the dragon. And this is what we get from the tree that was in the Garden of Eden, supposedly paradise. And paradise comes from the word paradosis. What is paradise and paradosis? It's referring to sacred knowledge and ritual. Okay, so the Garden of Eden most likely had some kind of temple complex in it where the dragons were worshipped, where sacrifices were made. And what's interesting to notice is this really old Caden map or manuscript from the year 1000. It's over 1,000 years old. The expulsion illustrated. And you'll see here of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. Obviously, there's a gate which is guarded by a seraphim, which is an angel, which is in fact a dragon, a humanoid being with wings, a dragon, not an angel, a dragon. You just get the language right. But look, this is a door. Doesn't that look like a door to a temple? I mean, it certainly belongs to something. You know, you can't just have a door randomly. It's got to be attached to a building. So most certainly, it's displayed in a map or an illustration that's over 1,000 years old, that there most likely was some form of temple in the Garden of Eden. Okay, this is Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden, being expelled from the inner sanctum of gaining dragon knowledge, the knowledge of the gods and the devils, the knowledge of the dragon. So let's have a look at what we know so far about Eden. Okay, there were it was a flat plain, because that's what the word Eden means in Sumerian. There were sacred trees, maybe more than one, maybe two, maybe more. Sacred groves. Okay, we talk about this over here when we spoke about paradosis. The temple or grove, sacred groves, and we'll get onto sacred groves because there are quite a few of those where these rituals happen. And of course, they talk about how the sacred groves were guarded by cherubim or dragons. Cherubim is a kind of angel. Notice over here, of course, that this, there's a half human, half serpent-like being, which is the serpent of the Garden of Eden, which tempted Eve to eat the apple. This is a very small picture, but this is by Lucas Crelliff the Elder. Sacred groves, okay? Sacred groves or sacred woods are any grove of trees that are of special religious importance to a particular culture. Sacred groves feature in all cultures of the world, okay? It's actually, I've yet to find a culture that doesn't have some sort of sacred grove or place of worship where offerings are brought or sacrifices are made. And of course, the most well-known and most ominous of the sacred groves where sacrifices are made and rituals are held is that known as Bohemian Grove, which is in Northern California in the Redwood Forests north of San Francisco. And many of the world's elite are known to actually meet here regularly. And they hold rituals here, supposedly one of them called the cremation of care. And it's apparently an effigy which is burned. But I would imagine there's some pretty real sacrifices that go on there too. In fact, if you dig a little bit, you'll find archives of real people being sacrificed. There's actual pictures of it online available. And in the background, you'll notice on both occasions, there's this giant stone owl, massive stone structure of an owl. Now, the owl is indicative of the god Moloch. And of course, sacrifices of children and people are made to this god. The English word grove translates from the Latin expressions I always get this wrong, Dominculus lucy, okay, Dominculus lucy, or the grove also means saltus. We're going to deal with the etymology of these two and what these actually mean, because there's so many deep symbolic ways in which we can deconstruct this, but you actually have to look at these words and understand what they're alluding to in other levels. So Dominculus lucy and saltus, we're going to look at those two words. First, let's look at the word dominculus. Okay, dom, obviously rooted in the root word of words such as domesticate, dominate, dominion, dome. You always find domes on churches, and doom. Again, notice the negatively associated words. But of course, there's another place that you find dom, and that's in the acronym DOM, which means Dio Optimo Maximo, which is a Latin expression meaning the highest and greatest God, or the highest and greatest dragon. Okay, so it's referencing again the dragons. Again, notice here we've got the wings above the word dom. And then of course the word Cula. That's an interesting dragon root word, because Cula comes up in some very interesting places. Of course, Cula is part of the root word group Cula, Kulu, Kolo, Kolu, Kola, and other words from this group include Dracula. Dracula is very interesting as well. Immaculate and ejaculate. Dracula is interesting because Count Dracula is a character from the Freemason Bram Stoker's 1897 Gothic horror novel, and went by the name Dracula, which is considered to be a prototypical archetypal vampire, and many subsequent works of fiction have been based upon this character. He's also depicted in the novel to be the origins of the werewolf. Now, the werewolf is just another depiction or artistic expression of the dragon. And of course, Dracula was based on an ancient, a real person that actually existed, known as Vlad Dracul, or Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler. Many aspects of Dracula were inspired by the 15th century Wallachian prince, who had a penchant for impaling his victims and drinking their blood. Dracula contains, of course, the dragon root word Cula. And Dracul actually means the demon or the dragon. And Vlad Dracul was a member of the Order of the Dragon. Then, of course, the word immaculate. The word immaculate also contains the dragon root word Cula, all right? And the word immaculate comes from the concept of the Immaculate Conception, which is interesting. And we will go into discuss the Immaculate Conception in later episodes of Dragonology, because this is a concept which needs to be expanded upon. But for now, let's look at where the word immaculate comes from. Immaculate comes from the Latin word eaculus. Okay, eaculus is a Latin expression for serpent or dragon, and this is a depiction of called the Immaculate Conception by an Illuminati-initiated artist, Peter Paul Rubens, and from around the 17th century, 1628. Notice the Virgin Mary standing on a serpent, and in the serpent's mouth is an apple, again indicative of the Garden of Eden, and the serpent carrying the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And of course, the word ejaculate. The word ejaculate references the release of sperm during male orgasm. The word ejaculate comes from the Latin expression jaculus, which is a Latin word for serpent or dragon. Okay, notice Cula and Kulu come from the same root word grouping. Now, eaculus and jaculus are virtually the same word. The J and the I, obviously the J only started coming into use around 500 years ago, but it's actually just the I with a swag on it. That's the J evolved from the I. It has a little bit of a swag on it. So eaculus and jaculus are virtually the same word, which is a Latin expression for serpent. In fact, go check Google Translate. It's exactly what it is. Now, when you ejaculate, it's a release of sperm. And in fact, the word sperm contains two very interesting dragon root words. It's a compound dragon root word. First, the SPE, all right, SPE, which is found in key dragon-related words such as species, speak, spell, spy, spirit, and spiral. And of course, P-E-R, okay, found in key dragonology-related words such as person, Persia, Peru, Peri, Pure, Pair, and Emperor. Pair becomes significant in a moment. The fruit known as a pear turns up in heraldry, and much like the symbol of the apple in the Garden of Eden, the pear is also a symbol of the dragon. Commonly shown in heraldic signs. Of course, this is a griffin-like character, which is a symbol of the dragon, a symbol of the sun, which is a symbol of the dragon, and of course, three pairs being a symbol of the dragon. Here we go. The word orgasm. The word orgasm contains the dragon root word or, all right? The dragon root word or org. And there's interesting places where the ORG turns up. Don't forget the G is a very significant letter. Found in keywords such as George, Gorgon, ogre, origins. Okay, here's where we go without the G. The or comes into origins, Horus, Lord, Emperor, word, exorcism, sport, horror, orphan, oracle, orcus, orange, whore, mirror, horn, and as in dragon horns or bull horns, and of course porn. Now we've spoken about Dominicus Lucy. Okay, look at the word Lucy. The Latin word Lucy or lucis translates from the English expression forest or grove. Other words that contain this root include hallucinate, lucid, and Lucifer. Now the word Lucifer is interesting because it originates with lux fear, meaning light bringer. And related words include decipher, deceive, and luxury. Okay, lux and luxury. Okay, decipher, Lucifer, decipher, deceive, and decipher come from the same group of words. Again, notice Lucifer shown, cloven hooves, wings, symbolic of dragons, and the serpent. These symbols are always there, cannot be mistaken. Now here's two very contrasting views of Lucifer, which I thought were rather interesting. Okay, this one, of course, being shown as Lucifer morning star. Okay, the morning star that pours light. Of course, the morning star appears at dawn and is showing Lucifer pouring light onto the earth, and shows Lucifer as a little baby cherub-looking thing with wings. Here's the more sinister-looking version of Lucifer as supposedly a demon of hell with horns and, really scary-looking claws and all these people in hell that are with him. This, of course, being earth and that being the domains of hell. We spoke about the word Saltus earlier. The word Saltus is a Byzantine name for the word salt. Okay, Saltus also referencing a grove or a forest, an orchard. Salt is very important in the symbolism related to dragonology and turns up in some very interesting places. In fact, God himself stands by the covenant of salt. In 2 Chronicles chapter 13 verses 4 and 5, it says, "Hear me, Jeroboam and all Israel. Should you not know that the Lord God of Israel gave the dominion over Israel to David forever, to him and his sons by a covenant of salt?" Again, this shows that Israel is in fact given to the descendants of David by the dragons, which is why Israel is such a significant place in the world and why America has a very tight allyship with Israel, and why Israel obviously gets away with all the atrocities that it gets away with. Covenant of salt. Let's talk about the covenant of salt. The commandments regarding grain offerings in the book of Leviticus states, "Every offering of your grain offering you shall season with salt. You shall not allow the salt of the covenant with your God to be lacking from your grain offering. With all your offering, you shall offer salt. Now, an offering, like a gold offering or a sacrificial offering, it's interesting that they say you should offer salt as well, okay? Because salt is a symbol of the dragon. It's a symbol of the covenant that was made with the Jewish people, making them bound forever to the dragon and making humanity the slaves of the Jews. Now, what's interesting to notice is that the word salt is actually a component of the seas or the oceans. That's where most table salt comes from, at least the ones that I use. And it's interesting to notice that, again, this theme comes up again, the marine theme, the oceans and the seas. Dragons are inextricably linked with marine themes. Salt water is also known as salus, okay? And the word salus and sail, think of saline solution, which is the solution of salt and water. That's where you get salus, salus. The word salus and sail are etymologically cognizant with each other. And sail is associated with a boat, a ship, or a ferry. We've dealt with this word already. Etymologically cognizant with, you know, Tinkerbell the fairy and the Furies. Now we're dealing with the Hebrew word for salt. The Hebrew word for salt is melak. And this is the first 4 letters of my own name, Melanie, so melak. And melak is etymologically cognizant with the Hebrew word for king, being melek. And then, of course, a Hebrew word for angel is malak. I found this very interesting when I was, you know, confirming this on Google. I was actually doing all my research to put this presentation together. And I found this very interesting little post. It goes, even though it's my first language, referencing Hebrew, even though it's my first language, I cannot tell the Hebrew words for angel, king, and salt apart without the use of Google, because they're all the same. Malak, Melek, and Melak. All right? So they are all very similar to each other. We've already spoken about the fact that the angels is a reference to the dragon. Most of the rulers and royalty of the world are blood-drinking, child, baby-eating, shape-shifting dragons. So the word salt, of course, in Hebrew, when we've spoken about the salt, covenant of salt being related to the Jews, of course, is malak, because a salt offering, the covenant of salt, was the covenant whereby the Jewish nation was sworn in service to the dragons to take control of humanity. Now, Melek, and Malak are all etymologically cognizant with the alternative name for the dragon bull god known as Moloch. Now, we've already spoken about Moloch in Bohemian Grove. Moloch is worshipped in his owl aspect, but Moloch is also commonly represented as a bull with horns. Of course, the word horn contains the dragon root word or. But yeah, there we have it. These words are etymologically cognizant with Moloch, and Moloch is worshipped in Bohemian Grove in his owl aspect. Moloch is sometimes also referenced as a woman, interestingly enough. Okay, so let's go on to, as I promised earlier, the location of the Garden of Eden. Now, there have been many theories which have persisted about the location of the Garden of Eden, but most likely the location is in the middle of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, around the area known as Sedilo Hills. All right, now, for those of you who have perhaps seen some of my work, last year I discovered the oldest and largest civilization to have ever been discovered, over 70,000 years old. If you have a look at this picture of Google Earth, Sedilo Hills is here, and it's the only hills in this entire area of the Kalahari. In fact, for hundreds of kilometers around, it is completely flat. You can see these hills from hundreds of kilometers away because this entire area is completely flat. Now, the Garden of Eden was said to be on a flat plain, all right? And these lines that you see here, these are ancient agricultural water ducts, okay? These are canals which have been dug in for agricultural purposes, and in between, obviously, there was agriculture grown, most likely to feed. And the size of this area, which has these lines on, is about the size of the state of Arizona, okay? And there are over This area is said to be able to feed over 6 billion people if it was planted properly. And it takes a huge amount of technology and skill to make these lines so perfectly straight and so evenly spaced over such a large space. In fact, this area is the largest and oldest man-made object or non-natural feature which can be seen from outer space. This ancient agricultural landscape contained aquaculture and agriculture. Of course, these canals probably about 150 to 250 meters wide, and this area over here is said to be about a mile wide in width, which is obviously would have been agricultural belts in between these waterways. This is slightly further back looking down over this area. Sedilo Hills is, of course, in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. Here is an approach picture to Sedilo Hills. And it's known as the Mountain of the Gods, and not for no reason. Okay, there's some very interesting allegory to this. And you'll notice over here is a sun symbol too, which of course is indicative of the dragon. And if you look on Sedilo Hills and you look out, you'll see it's a completely flat plain, all right? It's very, very, very flat. This entire area is very flat, apart from these hills, which can be seen from hundreds of kilometers away, because that whole area is a flat plain, much like the Garden of Eden was said to be. And this area was most likely destroyed in what was known as the biblical floods. In fact, I actually have released a interesting documentary film about this, explaining exactly what happened. If anybody's interested in learning more about this, please go check out my documentary film, Secrets of the Kalahari. Learn about the oldest dragon ritual worship site ever found, and it dates back to over 70,000 years old. And of course, you can get this documentary film at our website, dragonology.info. And please do follow us on Facebook. Go to Dragonology, like our page, and you'll see all the updates and archives posted here. And of course, if anybody wants to catch up with all that has to do with Dragonology, my book, Dragonology Spellbreaker, is also available at our website. It is book 1 of the series, and we are currently working on book 2. And of course, Dragonology will be shown on Conscious Consumer Network regularly in this slot on the Thursdays. Please, guys, do support free and independent media. We are a publicly funded network, and all of our research is independent. We do this because we genuinely believe in empowering people with real information based upon accurate research. And that's it for us tonight, folks. Thank you for joining in for this episode of Dragonology. We look forward to seeing you for episode 2. And as always, we thank you for supporting free and independent media. My name is Milvi. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Good night.
Humanity has been on an epic journey of discovery, learning the truth about the world we live in. New discoveries about the true origins of humanity, ancient history, free energy, as well as the systematic corruption of world governments are now on the forefront of our daily reality. Is the world headed towards destruction based on control and power? Or is an opportunity now being presented to shift and uplift into a higher consciousness? My name is Milvi, co-founder and creative director of Conscious Consumer Network, an independent broadcast network that was launched on the 1st of January 2015. In the last 3 years, Conscious Consumer Network has broadcast over 2,800 shows in multiple languages, featuring guests from across the world, whilst creating media that is aimed at the creation of a free, fair, peaceful, just, sustainable world. Conscious Consumer Network provides full training and an interactive support network for all broadcasters, and we are always looking for inspiring and educational content.
Hi, this is Lady Liberty.
And this is Miro Siegel.
In 2018, Conscious Consumer Network has expanded to multiple broadcast locations, increasing our availability and reach across the world, remaining on the cutting edge of independent media. If we wish to create a better world, we must first create better media, geared towards real education instead of indoctrination.
You guys really are what changing the world is going to be about. It's educating kids at a grassroots level.
Having become a pillar of stability in the turbulent world of independent media, we have even more going on in 2018. Conscious Consumer Network is a publicly funded network, and we rely on all of you to keep us on the air. Show your support for independent media by donating to our 2018 Network Support Fund. Dare to seek a better world. Support independent media.